He stood there, swirling a glass of 50-year-old scotch, laughing at a joke he'd made about his new wife's spending habits. Preston Sterling thought he was untouchable. He believed he had secured the deal of the century, a trophy wife who looked good on his arm but had zero access to his family's dynasty. He thought he had trapped her with an ironclad prenup, a document so brutal it would leave her destitute if she ever dared to leave. But Preston made one fatal error. He assumed silence was submission. When the projector flickered to life during the reception, the guests didn't see a montage of childhood photos. They saw the fine print he was too arrogant to read. And the silence that swept across the ballroom? That wasn't respect. That was the sound of a predator realizing he had just become the prey. The ink was barely dry on the document when Preston Sterling slid it across the mahogany desk, a smug smile playing on his lips. It was 3 days before the wedding. "Just a formality, babe," Preston said, though his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth one expects from a fiancé. My father insisted. "You know how the Sterlings are about legacy." Sitting across from him was Isla Bennett. To the outside world, Isla was the lucky one. She was a kindergarten teacher from a nondescript suburb in Ohio, a woman who bought her clothes off the rack and drove a Honda Civic that rattled when it hit 60. She was marrying into the Sterling family, Manhattan real estate royalty, owners of half the skyline, and socialites who appeared in Page 6 more often than they appeared in church. Isla picked up the document. It was heavy, thick. "Of course, Preston," she said, her voice soft. "I don't want your money. I just want you." Preston chuckled, a sound that grated on the ears of the paralegal standing in the corner. "That's sweet, Isla, really. But let's be adults. If this, us, doesn't work out, we leave with what we came with. Clean break. No alimony. No claim to the Sterling Trust. No claim to the properties acquired during the marriage." He didn't mention the fidelity clause he had buried on page 40, which heavily penalized her for infidelity, but curiously left him exempt. He didn't mention the image clause that dictated her weight must remain within 5 pounds of her wedding weight, or her allowance would be docked. He thought she was reading it. In reality, Isla was staring at the watermark on the paper, her mind racing back to a conversation she'd had 2 weeks prior with a man named Nathaniel, a forensic accountant she had dated in college, a man Preston didn't know existed. "He's hiding assets, Isla," Nathaniel had told her over burner phones. "The Sterling Empire is a house of cards built on offshore shell companies. If you sign a standard prenup, you're liable for his debts when the IRS comes knocking. But if you sign a specific type of modified agreement, you become the creditor, not the debtor." Isla looked up at Preston. He checked his Rolex, impatient. "Do you need a pen?" he asked, holding out a Mont Blanc worth more than her car. "I have one," she whispered. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cheap blue ballpoint. She turned to the last page, but before she signed, she paused. "Preston, I noticed there were some typos on the draft you sent over yesterday. I printed a fresh copy. It's the same text, just corrected the spelling of my middle name." She pulled a fresh, crisp document from her tote bag. It looked identical to the one on the desk. Same font, same binding. Preston laughed, taking a sip of his espresso. He didn't even look at it. He was too busy texting his best man, Brody, about the bachelor party in Vegas. "God, you're a perfectionist. Fine, whatever. Just sign it so we can go to lunch. Mother is waiting at Le Bernardin." He didn't read it. Why would he? He was Preston Sterling. He controlled the room. He controlled the money. He controlled Isla. Isla signed. She pushed the document toward him. "Your turn." Preston scrawled his signature without a second glance, tossing the pen onto the desk. "Done. Now, can we go? You're wearing that to lunch?" Isla smiled. It was a small, tight smile. "I'll change in the car." As they walked out of the lawyer's office, Preston's arm draped possessively over her shoulder. He felt like a king who had just secured his borders. He had no idea that he had just signed away his life. The wedding was held at the Oheka Castle on Long Island, a venue that screamed excess. The flowers alone cost more than Isla's parents had made in their entire lives. Beatrice Sterling, Preston's mother, was a woman made of ice and diamonds. She sat in the bridal suite, watching Isla's makeup artist apply the final touches. "Make sure you cover that freckle on her chin," Beatrice commanded, sipping champagne through a straw so as not to ruin her lipstick. "It looks dirty." Isla sat perfectly still. She had been dealing with Beatrice's passive-aggressive and often aggressive comments for 2 years. "You're too short for that dress." "Is that polyester? Your father is a mechanic? How quaint." "Thank you, Beatrice," Isla said, her eyes meeting the older woman's in the mirror. "Everything is perfect." "It better be," Beatrice snapped. "This wedding is a PR event for the firm. The stock has been volatile. We need to show stability. A wholesome, simple girl like you. It plays well with the mid-market investors. Makes Preston look grounded." Grounded. That was the narrative. The playboy billionaire tamed by the small-town teacher. Beatrice stood up and walked over to Isla, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. "Listen to me, girl. You are here because we allow you to be here. Preston gets bored easily. If you want to stay in this family, you turn a blind eye. You smile, you wave, and you never ask questions about the business. Do you understand?" "I understand," Isla said. "Good. Now fix your hair. It's flat." Beatrice swept out of the room, leaving a trail of Chanel No. 5 and anxiety. As soon as the door clicked shut, Isla's demeanor shifted. The timid, wide-eyed look vanished. She picked up her phone. Text to Nathaniel. "Is the file ready?" Reply. "Loaded and encrypted. The projector is connected to the cloud. Signal when you're ready." Isla took a deep breath. She looked at herself in the mirror. She wasn't just a mechanic's daughter. She was a woman who had spent the last 6 months studying the Sterling financials better than their own CFO. She knew about the Cayman accounts. She knew about the bribes paid to zoning commissioners in Brooklyn. She knew that Preston was technically broke, leveraging debt to maintain a billionaire lifestyle. And she knew that the prenup he signed 3 days ago, the one he didn't read, contained a clause called the Full Disclosure Mandate. It stated that if any party had misrepresented their financial standing by more than 10% at the time of signing, the assets of the offending party would be immediately transferred to a trust controlled by the aggrieved spouse as a penalty for fraud. Preston had listed his net worth at $400 million. Isla knew it was actually negative $20 million. He had lied, and she had the receipts. The reception was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of lobster thermidor and old money. A 10-piece orchestra played soft jazz as guests mingled, unaware that they were standing on a battlefield. Preston was in his element. He held court near the open bar, surrounded by his groomsmen, Brody, Chad, and Harrison. They were carbon copies of him, loud, wealthy, and arrogant. "I'm telling you, boys," Preston shouted over the music, sloshing his drink. "It's the perfect setup. She gets the credit card with the limit I set. She lives in the house I own. And if she gets annoying, snap." He snapped his fingers. "Gone. Back to Ohio, and I keep the ring." Brody laughed, clapping him on the back. "You're a genius, Press. Most guys lose half. You're going to gain a housekeeper." "She's not a housekeeper," Preston corrected with a sneer. Housekeepers get paid. She's doing this for love." They erupted in laughter. Across the room, Isla sat at the head table. She wasn't eating. She was watching Preston. She watched him flirt with the waitress. She watched him ignore her parents, who were sitting awkwardly at a table in the back, near the kitchen doors, a slight arranged by Beatrice. Isla's father, Frank, caught her eye. He looked uncomfortable in his rented tux. He gave her a small thumbs up. Frank didn't know the full plan, but he knew his daughter. He knew that look in her eye. It was the same look she had when she fixed an engine that 3 mechanics had given up on. It was the look of someone who had identified the problem and found the wrench. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. Feedback whined through the speakers, silencing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice boomed, "please take your seats. It is time for the toasts." The room shuffled. Chairs scraped. Preston sauntered over to the head table, falling into the seat next to Isla. He smelled of scotch and expensive cologne. "Smile, babe," he whispered aggressively in her ear. "The investors are watching." Isla turned to him, her face serene. "I am smiling, Preston." "Good. Brody is up first. This is going to be good. We wrote some killer jokes about your hometown." Brody took the microphone. He was already drunk. He loosened his tie and grinned. "Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Brody. I've known Preston since boarding school. We've been through everything. Hostile takeovers, hostile ex-girlfriends." The crowd chuckled politely. "But seriously," Brody continued, swaying slightly, "Preston has always been a man who knows what he wants, and he knows how to get it at a discount." Laughter. Beatrice clapped from the front row. "But today isn't just about Preston," Brody said. "It's about Isla. Isla, stand up." Isla stood up slowly. The spotlight hit her. "Now, we all know Preston is the shark," Brody said. "And Isla, well, she's the minnow. But hey, sharks gotta eat, right?" The joke landed poorly with her side of the family, but the Sterlings roared with laughter. Preston was practically crying, slapping the table. "Sit down, Isla," Preston commanded under his breath, still laughing. Isla didn't sit. Instead, she walked over to the MC. She gently took the microphone from a confused Brody. "Thank you, Brody," Isla said. Her voice was steady, crystal clear. "That was illuminating." The room went quiet. This wasn't on the schedule. Beatrice stiffened in her chair. "I actually have a little presentation of my own," Isla said. "Preston loves surprises. And since he loves business so much, I thought we should start our marriage with full transparency." She pulled a small remote clicker from her bridal sash. "Preston." She looked down at him. He looked annoyed. "You told me that marriage is a contract, a partnership. So I thought we should review the terms." "Isla, sit down," Preston hissed, his face flushing red. "You're embarrassing me." "Oh, honey," Isla smiled. "I haven't even started." She pointed the clicker at the massive 20-foot screen behind the stage, which was currently displaying a photo of them kissing in Paris. Click. The screen went black for a second. Then a document appeared. It was blown up to massive proportions. The header read, "Prenuptial Agreement, Addendum B." Preston squinted. He didn't recognize that page. "As you all know," Isla addressed the crowd, "Preston insisted on a prenup. He wanted to protect his assets, which is very smart, but—" Click. The screen changed. It was a bank statement, a statement from Credit Suisse, under the name Sterling Holdings, LLC. The balance was circled in red. 500,000 was overdraft default. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Beatrice stood up. "Turn that off! Technical difficulties! Cut the power!" "Sit down, Beatrice," Isla said, her voice turning into steel. "I have the microphone." She looked at Preston. His arrogance was gone. His face was the color of ash. "You see," Eisler continued, "Preston told me he was worth 400 million, but it seems he forgot to carry the one. Or perhaps he forgot that using investor funds to pay off personal gambling debts is, what's the word, felony embezzlement?" Click. A new image. It was a chain of emails between Preston and Brody. Subject: hiding the losses before the IPO. Body: just move the debt to the shell company in Panama. Once I marry the girl, we can use her clean credit to refinance the jet. She's clueless. She'll sign anything. The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of shock. The investors in the room, the men Preston was trying to impress, were suddenly pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their lawyers. Brody dropped his champagne glass. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Preston scrambled up, knocking his chair over. "You bitch! What did you do?" "I signed the prenup, Preston," Eisler said calmly. "The one I printed. The one that says if you lie about your assets, I get control of the trust to rectify the fraud." She looked at the screen again. Click. The final slide. It was a live video feed. It showed two men in windbreakers walking through the back doors of the reception hall. The letters FBI were emblazoned in yellow on their backs. "Preston Sterling," Eisler said, dropping the microphone. "I think your ride is here." The silence that had gripped the ballroom broke instantly, replaced by a cacophony of shouting, shattering glass, and the frantic clicking of camera shutters. The wedding photographer, a young man named Leo, had instinctively kept shooting. He knew, with the instinct of a true artist, that he wasn't photographing a wedding anymore. He was documenting a crime scene. Preston Sterling, the man who had stood atop the social hierarchy just minutes ago, was now scrambling backward, knocking over a tower of champagne flutes. The crystal crashed to the floor, splashing him with vintage Dom Perignon. A cruel irony, drowning in the luxury he couldn't afford. "This is a mistake," Preston screamed, his voice cracking. "My father is Riley Sterling. You can't touch me!" The two FBI agents didn't care about Riley Sterling. They cared about the federal warrant in their pockets for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Agent Miller, the lead agent with a face carved from granite, stepped onto the dance floor. "Preston Sterling, you are under arrest." "Eisler!" Preston yelled, turning to her, desperation wild in his eyes. Tell them this is a joke. Fix this." Eisler stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at him. She hadn't moved. She looked like a marble statue of justice, minus the blindfold. She saw everything clearly. "I can't fix a Ponzi scheme, Preston," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone she had set down, but was still live on the podium. "I'm a teacher, not a magician." Beatrice Sterling threw herself between the agents and her son. For a moment, the Ice Queen melted, revealing a feral mother lion. "Don't you dare touch him! Do you know who we are? I will have your badges. I will sue this entire department into oblivion." Agent Miller didn't even blink. "Mom, step aside or you will be charged with obstruction of justice." "Let them take him, Mother," Preston whimpered, the fight draining out of him as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Call Alistair. Call the lawyers." As they dragged Preston out, past the stunned investors, past the weeping bridesmaids, and past the horrified catering staff, Eisler walked calmly down the stairs of the stage. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked straight to the back table where her parents were sitting. Her mother, Susan, looked terrified. "Eisler, honey, what is happening?" Eisler picked up her purse. "We're leaving, Mum. Dad, get the car." "But the cake," Frank stammered, pointing to the 6-tier confection that cost more than his house. "We can get cake at the diner on the way home," Eisler said, taking her father's arm. As they moved toward the exit, Beatrice blocked their path, Her face was contorted with rage, her perfect makeup running. She looked like a demon in Dior. "You little rat," Beatrice hissed, shaking with fury. "You planned this. You seduced him. You infiltrated our family and you set him up." Isla stopped. She looked at Beatrice, really looked at her, for the first time without fear. "I didn't seduce him, Beatrice. I listened to him." "There's a difference," Isla said coolly. "And I didn't set him up. I just turned on the lights. Whatever you think this family is, it ended the moment Preston signed that paper." "I will destroy you," Beatrice spat. "You won't get a dime. That prenup is void. It was signed under duress." Isla leaned in close, so only Beatrice could hear. "Read page 42, Beatrice, the competency clause. It states that the signer acknowledges they are of sound mind and have had independent legal counsel. Preston's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, signed off on it. If you claim duress, you're claiming your own lawyer is incompetent. Go ahead. Sue me. But remember, I have the hard drives." Beatrice went pale. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Isla stepped around her and walked out into the cool night air. As the valet brought around her father's rusted Ford truck, which looked comically out of place next to the Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, Isla took the veil off her head. She folded it neatly and tossed it into a trash can. She wasn't a bride anymore. She was the CEO of a hostile takeover. The media storm was immediate and brutal. The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Vanity Fair all ran the story. They dubbed Isla the Black Widow of Wall Street, though the public quickly rebranded her as the Robin Hood Bride. The Sterling family assets were frozen within 24 hours, but the real battle was happening in the conference room of Caldwell, Moore and Stein, the most expensive law firm in Manhattan. Beatrice had hired Julian Thorne, a litigator known as the Butcher. He had never lost a high-profile divorce case. He sat at the head of the table, looking at Isla with disjointed amusement. Isla sat opposite him. She didn't have a high-priced lawyer. She had Nathaniel. Nathaniel wasn't a lawyer. He was a forensic accountant with a slight slouch and glasses that were too big for his face. But he had a mind, like a steel trap. "Miss Bennet," Julian Thorne began, his voice smooth like oil. "Let's cut the theatrics. The document you tricked my client into signing is a farce. It's fraudulent. We are prepared to offer you a settlement of $50,000 to go away and sign a non-disclosure agreement. If you refuse, we will bury you in litigation for the next 20 years. Isla didn't speak. She nodded to Nathaniel. Nathaniel opened his laptop and spun it around. "Mr. Thorne," Nathaniel said, his voice shaky but determined. "You're operating under the assumption that this is a divorce case. It's not. It's a corporate restructuring." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "The prenup," Isla spoke up, her voice steady. "It wasn't just a marriage contract. It was a conditional asset transfer agreement. Preston listed his Sterling Holdings shares as personal property. The contract states that in the event of proven financial perjury, which the FBI has now confirmed, ownership of those shares transfers to the spouse to satisfy the breach of faith penalty. "That won't hold up in court," Julian scoffed. "It's unconscionable." "Actually," Nathaniel interjected, pulling up a case file on the screen, "it's based on the 1998 Anderson versus Anderson precedent, specifically regarding executive fraud in marital contracts. And there's something else." Nathaniel clicked a file named Projected Losses Take DF. "The Sterling family is broke, Mr. Thorne," Nathaniel said. "Liquid assets are gone. The properties are leveraged at 110%. The only thing of value left is the intellectual property and the grandfathered zoning rights in Midtown. If you void the prenup, The banks seize everything immediately. The Sterlings will be on the street. Julian Thorne stopped smiling. He looked at the numbers. He was a shark, and he knew the smell of blood. However, Eisler continued, leaning forward, if the prenup stands, I become the majority shareholder of the holding company. I can restructure the debt. I can sell off the toxic assets, like the yacht and the Hamptons estate, and save the core business. Beatrice keeps her penthouse. Preston gets a legal defense fund. But I run the company. Beatrice, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. Over my dead body. Eisler turned to her. That can be arranged, metaphorically speaking. If you fight this, Beatrice, the banks foreclose next week. You lose the penthouse. You lose the drivers. You lose the club membership. You become poor. The word hung in the air like a curse. For Beatrice, poverty was worse than death. It was worse than prison. You have 24 hours to decide, Eisler said, standing up. Nathaniel and I have a meeting with the SEC. We're cooperating fully. I suggest you do the same. As Isla walked out of the high-rise, she felt a vibration in her pocket. It was a text from Preston, sent from a contraband phone in the holding cell. Preston, why are you doing this? Isla stared at the screen. She thought about the way he spoke to waiters. She thought about the way he laughed at her father's calloused hands. She thought about the millions of dollars he stole from pension funds to buy watches. Yela. Because someone had to be the adult in the room. 3 months later. The Sterling Tower in downtown Manhattan was buzzing with rumors. The old executives, men who spent 3-hour lunches drinking scotch, had been fired. The boardroom, once a place of cigars and backslapping, was now a war room. Isla sat at the head of the table. She wore a tailored navy suit, sharp and professional. No jewelry. No excess. To her right sat Nathaniel, now the chief financial officer. To her left sat Frank, her father. He wasn't an executive, but Isla had put him in charge of physical operations. Frank knew buildings, he knew pipes, wiring and foundations. For the first time in 40 years, the Sterling properties were actually being maintained, not just cosmetically patched. The door opened, and Beatrice walked in. She looked older. The stress had etched lines into her face that no amount of Botox could hide. She was wearing a simple black dress. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like an employee. "You wanted to see me?" Beatrice asked. Her voice clipped. "Sit down, Beatrice," Eisler said, not looking up from her papers. Beatrice sat. The humiliation radiated off her. "We reviewed your expense report for the month," Isla said, sliding a paper across the table. "You spent $12,000 on floral arrangements for the penthouse lobby." "It's standard," Beatrice defended weakly. "We have an image to uphold." "We have a debt to service," Eisler corrected. "The floral budget is cut. You can use silk flowers or you can grow them yourself. Also, the driver is gone. I got you a subway pass." Beatrice's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. I don't know how to use the subway." "You'll learn," Eisler said. "Millions of New Yorkers do it every day. It's quite efficient." "Isla, please." Beatrice's voice broke. It was the first time she had ever pleaded. "Preston is in federal prison. He got 10 years. I am alone. Don't humiliate me like this." Isla put down her pen. She looked at the woman who had tormented her for years. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel revenge. She just felt done. "I'm not humiliating you, Beatrice. I'm saving you. You're living within your means for the first time in your life. You have a roof over your head. You have food. You have a job. As the liaison for the charity foundation, I'm starting with the recovered funds. You have more than most." Isla stood up and walked to the window. looking out over the city. Preston thought power was about controlling people, Isla said softly. He thought money was a weapon. But it's not. It's just a tool. And if you use it to build yourself a pedestal, eventually you run out of stone. She turned back to Beatrice. Get to work, Beatrice. The foundation launches next week, and wear something modest. It's not about you anymore. Beatrice stared at her former daughter-in-law. She saw the steel in Isla's spine. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that Isla was better at being a Sterling than the Sterlings ever were. Beatrice took the subway pass. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked out without a word. Isla sighed and looked at Nathaniel. How are we looking? Nathaniel adjusted his glasses. We're in the black, barely, but we're stable. The investors are happy. They like the new narrative. The redemption of Sterling. Good, Isla said. Then let's go get some lunch. I'm craving a burger. Le Bernardin, Nathaniel joked. Isla laughed. No, Wendy's. My treat. But just as the story seemed to be finding its equilibrium, the phone on the conference table buzzed. It was a private number. Isla picked it up. This is Isla Bennett. Miss Bennett? A voice, rasping and deep, came through the line. It wasn't Preston. It wasn't a lawyer. Who is this? My name is Cyrus Vane, the voice said. I'm an associate of Preston's father, Riley. From the old days. The really old days. Isla felt a chill run down her spine. Riley Sterling had died 10 years ago, or so the story went. What do you want? Isla asked. You've done a marvelous job cleaning up the books, my dear, Cyrus said. You found the shell companies. You found the offshore accounts. But you didn't look deep enough. You missed the shadow ledger. The what? Preston didn't just owe money to banks, Miss Bennett, Cyrus said, his voice dropping to a growl. He owed money to us, the syndicate. And now that you're the owner, that debt is yours. The line went dead. Isla looked at the phone. The victory she felt moments ago evaporated. She looked at Nathaniel, who was happily typing away, unaware that the ground had just shifted again. She realized then that the prenup hadn't just given her the assets, it had given her the targets on her back. The phone call from Cyrus Vane ended with a click that sounded less like a disconnection and more like a hammer cocking back on a pistol. Isla lowered the phone slowly, her hand trembling just enough to be noticeable. The conference room, with its panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, suddenly felt like a glass cage. Isla, Nathaniel asked, his fingers pausing over his keyboard. You look like you've seen a ghost. Who was that? Isla didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window. Down below, the city moved in its chaotic rhythm, yellow cabs weaving, pedestrians rushing. But for the first time in months, Isla didn't feel like the master of this domain. She felt watched. Nathaniel, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Pack your laptop, hard drives only. Leave the phone, we need to go. Go? Go where? We have the board meeting in an hour. Cancel it, Isla commanded, grabbing her coat. Call my father. Tell him to meet us in the sub-basement of the East Village property, the one with the erratic heating system. The boiler room? Nathaniel stammered, scrambling to pack his bag. Why? Isla turned to him, her eyes hard. Because it's the only place in this city where the walls don't have ears. An hour later, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the Sterling Tower. The sub-basement of the East Village building smelled of rust, oil, and 80 years of damp concrete. The HVAC systems roared like sleeping dragons, creating a wall of white noise that would baffle any listening device. Frank Bennett was already there, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He looked at his daughter, dressed in a $2,000 suit, but standing in a puddle of condensation, with deep concern. "You want to tell me why I'm missing the Mets game, honey?" Frank asked. Isla placed her burner phone on a rusted workbench. "Preston wasn't the top of the food chain, Dad. I just got a call from a man named Cyrus Vane. He claims Preston owed a debt, a shadow ledger." "Vane?" Nathaniel went pale in the dim light. He sat on a crate, balancing his laptop on his knees. "Isla, I saw that name in the deep archives. I thought it was a shell company code. Vane isn't a company. It's a cleaner, a fixer for the cartel syndicates in the 90s. "He said the debt is mine now," Isla said. "But he said something else. He said he works for an associate of Riley Sterling." Frank frowned. "Riley's dead. Boating accident. 10 years ago. I remember because it was the same week I fixed the transmission on his Rolls-Royce." "What if he isn't?" Isla asked. "Think about it. The life insurance payout saved the company from bankruptcy back then. The body was never found. And now, the moment I make the company profitable again, a ghost comes knocking to collect?" Frank went quiet. He looked at the massive furnace behind him. It was an industrial beast, older than anyone in the room. He walked over to it, tapping the brickwork surrounding the intake valve. "You know," Frank said slowly, "I was down here yesterday doing the inspection. I found something odd. This brickwork. It's newer than the rest. The mortar is a different composition. I thought it was a lazy repair job." He picked up a sledgehammer from his tool bag. "But maybe it's not a repair." Isla nodded. "Open it." Frank swung. The hammer connected with a dull thud. Dust flew. He swung again, and a brick cracked loose. Within minutes, he had revealed a hollow cavity behind the furnace wall. Inside sat a heavy, fire-proof lockbox. Isla pulled it out. The lock was rusted, but Frank popped it with a crowbar. Inside was a single book, leather-bound. Heavy. Isla opened it. It wasn't just a ledger, it was a diary of corruption. Page after page detailed the real history of the Sterling Empire, the real estate deals that were actually money laundering operations for Eastern European mobs, the consulting fees that were bribes to zoning commissioners and judges. Nathaniel leaned over her shoulder, scanning the pages. "My God," he whispered. "Look at the dates. The entries continue after Riley's death." Isla turned to the final page. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Entry. "The girl has stabilized the asset. The stock is up. Time to initiate the harvest. Transfer ownership to Vane Trust within 30 days, or initiate liquidation of the Bennett family." It was signed with a flourish. R.S. "He's alive," Isla breathed. "He faked his death to escape the heat, let his son take the fall for the debt, and now that I've cleaned up the mess, he wants his kingdom back." "Liquidation of the Bennett family," Frank repeated, his voice low and dangerous. He gripped the sledgehammer tighter. "He's threatening you? He's threatening your mother?" "He's threatening all of us," Isla said. She closed the book. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. "He thinks I'm just a placeholder. He thinks I'm the housekeeper keeping his seat warm. What do we do?" Nathaniel asked, terrified. "We go to the FBI, right?" "The FBI?" Isla pointed to a page in the ledger. "See this name? That's the assistant director of the New York field office. Riley owns him. If we go to the feds, we'll be dead before we fill out the paperwork." "So we run?" Frank asked. "No," Isla said. She looked at the roaring furnace. "We don't run. Riley is a businessman, a shark, and there is only one way to deal with a shark." She turned to Nathaniel. "I need you to scan every page of this book, encrypt it. Then I need you to find out where Cyrus Vane is currently located." "And then what?" Isla buttoned her coat. "Then I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." The call came 2 days later. Isla was ready. She answered on the second ring. "Hello, Cyrus." "Miss Bennett?" The rasping voice returned. "I trust you found the documents we discussed?" "I found them," Isla said, her voice steady. "And I found the instructions regarding the transfer of ownership. I'm willing to comply." There was a pause. Cyrus had expected resistance. A wise decision. We expected a fight. "I know when I'm beaten," Isla lied. "I want to meet the principal. I'm not signing over $1 billion company to a proxy. I want to look Riley Sterling in the eye. That is irregular." "It's the deal," Isla said firmly. "I bring the transfer papers. He brings the release forms for the debt. Face to face. Or I burn the company to the ground before you get a single share." A muffled conversation took place on the other end. Then Cyrus returned. "Teterboro Airport, Hangar 4, midnight. Come alone. If we see a wire or a cop or even a drone, your father's mechanic shop goes up in flames." "I'll be there," Isla said. She hung up. She looked at Nathaniel and Frank, who were standing in her living room. "He took the bait," she said. "This is suicide," Nathaniel said, pacing the room. "Isla, you're walking into a room with a dead man and a hit man. I can't let you do this." "I'm not going in empty-handed," Isla said. She picked up her phone. "Nathaniel, is the program ready?" "It's ready," Nathaniel sighed, adjusting his glasses. "The dead man's switch. I've linked the encrypted scans of the ledger to a cloud server. If you don't input a specific alphanumeric code into your phone every 15 minutes, the server automatically blasts the files to the New York Times, the Washington Post, Interpol, and, just for good measure, the Sinaloa cartel's known tip line." "Good," Isla said. "And Dad?" Frank held up a small, customized device. It looked like a garage door opener. "I rigged the perimeter. If things go south, well, let's just say their exit won't be smooth." Isla took a deep breath. She looked at herself in the mirror. She wore a white trench coat, sharp and immaculate. She looked like a target. But underneath, she was wearing the armor of absolute preparation. "Let's go hunt a ghost." The Teterboro hangar was cavernous and freezing. Rain lashed against the metal roof, echoing like gunfire. A single private jet sat in the center, its engines whining with a low, menacing idle. Isla walked into the pool of light cast by the hangar's floodlights. She stood alone, clutching a leather briefcase. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up to the jet. The door opened. Cyrus Vane stepped out first. He was even bigger in person, a wall of muscle and scar tissue. He scanned the hangar with predatory eyes. He checked Isla for a wire, patting her down with rough professional efficiency. "She's clean," Cyrus grunted. He opened the back door. The man who stepped out looked nothing like the monster Isla had imagined. Riley Sterling was tanned, fit, and wearing a linen suit that looked perfect despite the damp air. He looked like a kindly grandfather who spent his days sailing, but his eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a shark, black, flat, and devoid of soul. "Isla," Riley said, spreading his arms as if welcoming a favorite niece. "My, you are even more striking in person. Preston always did have good taste in women, if nothing else." "Cut the pleasantries, Riley," Isla said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "I'm here to do business." Riley chuckled, walking toward her. "Direct. I like that. You know, I watched you during the wedding fiasco. The way you dismantled my son. It was art. Truly. I almost regretted having to destroy you." "You don't have to destroy anything," Isla said. "I have the transfer papers right here." She lifted the briefcase. "Sterling Holdings, transferred to the Vane Trust. You get your company back. I get my life back." Riley stopped a few feet from her. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You see, that's the problem, my dear. You know too much. You found the ledger. You know I'm alive. I can't simply let you walk away. Isla didn't flinch. So what? You kill me? Here? In New Jersey? We are professionals, Isla, Riley said softly. You'll board the plane with us. We'll fly to a nice, quiet spot over the Atlantic. And sadly, you'll have a tragic accident. A distraught ex-wife, unable to cope with the pressure. It's a very believable narrative. Cyrus took a step toward her, his hand reaching for her arm. I wouldn't do that, Isla said. She didn't move. She didn't run. She simply held up her phone. Riley raised an eyebrow. Calling for help? No, Isla said. I'm resetting the timer. She tapped a code into the screen. What timer? Riley asked, his smile faltering slightly. It's called a dead man's switch, Isla explained, her voice gaining strength. Nathaniel digitized your ledger, Riley. Every page, every bribe, every murder order, and most importantly, the page where you detailed stealing $50 million from the Sinaloa cartel. Riley's face twitched. The mention of the cartel hit a nerve. The files are on a secure server, Isla continued, stepping closer to him. If I don't enter that code every 15 minutes, the files are released. To the press, to the FBI, and to the cartel. You're bluffing, Riley snarled. You don't have the technical capability. I don't, Isla admitted. But Nathaniel does. He was top of his class at MIT before he became an accountant. He built a redundancy system. Even if you kill me, the code doesn't get entered. The email goes out. And you, Riley, you become the most hunted man on Earth. The feds will want you for fraud. The cartel will want you for, well, skinning. Riley stared at her. The grandfatherly mask slipped, revealing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. He looked at Cyrus. Check the network, Riley barked. Cyrus pulled out a tablet. He tapped furiously. There's a massive encrypted data packet sitting on a mirrored server in Iceland, boss. It's keyed to a manual trigger. She's telling the truth. Riley looked back at Isla. For the first time, he looked old. What do you want? He hissed. I want you gone, Isla said. Permanently. She reached into her briefcase. Cyrus tensed, reaching for his gun. Isla pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a confession, Isla said, admitting to the faked death, the fraud, and the framing of Preston. You're going to sign it. I'm going to keep it in a safe deposit box, as insurance. And if I sign, then you get on that plane, Isla pointed to the jet. You fly back to whatever rock you crawled out from under, and you stay dead. You never contact me. You never contact Beatrice. You never contact Preston. Preston? Riley scoffed. Why do you care about him? He treated you like garbage. He did, Isla agreed. But he's paying for his crimes. You're running from yours. I'm not saving him because I like him, Riley. I'm saving him because, unlike you, I have a conscience. Riley stared at the paper. The rain hammered on the roof. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Riley snatched the pen from her hand. He scrawled his signature on the confession. You're a fool, Riley spat. You could have asked for millions. You could have been rich. I am rich, Isla said, taking the paper back. I have something you'll never have. I can sleep at night. Riley turned on his heel. Let's go, Cyrus. They walked back to the SUV. But just as Riley reached for the door handle, a loud clang echoed through the hangar. The landing gear of the jet collapsed. The plane lurched forward, its nose slamming into the concrete. Riley spun around, eyes wide. Isla stood there, holding the garage door opener her father had given her. Oops, Isla said, her face deadpan. My father fixed the hydraulics on that plane while you were waiting. He said the pressure valve looked unreliable. Riley's face turned purple. You broke my jet. Consider it a parting gift, Isla called out. Now you have to fly commercial. I hear the TSA is very thorough with people using fake passports. Police sirens began to wail in the distance, another layer of Frank's plan. Riley panicked. He scrambled into the SUV. Drive! He screamed at Cyrus. Drive! The SUV screeched out of the hangar, disappearing into the rainy night. They were running, and they would keep running for the rest of their lives. Isla stood in the empty hangar, watching them go. She looked down at her phone. The timer had 5 minutes left. She typed a text to Nathaniel. Message. The ghost is gone. Disarm the switch. She let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 6 months. Her knees shook, just for a second. Then, she straightened her coat, picked up her briefcase, and walked out into the rain. She had a board meeting to reschedule. 6 months later. The rebranding of the company was complete. The gold sterling letters had been removed from the tower, replaced by sleek, modern steel reading Bennett and Sterling. Isla sat in her office. It was no longer the dark, mahogany cave that Preston and Riley had preferred. She had knocked down the walls, replaced the heavy curtains with floor-to-ceiling glass, and filled the space with light. Nathaniel, now the CFO and a partial owner, walked in. He looked different, more confident, his suits actually fitting him now. The Q3 reports are in, Nathaniel said, placing a tablet on her desk. Profits are up 18%. And the literacy charity Beatrice is running? It just got a presidential commendation. Beatrice actually cried when she got the letter. Isla smiled, sipping her coffee. She's terrifyingly efficient when she uses her powers for good. And we got a letter from upstate, Nathaniel said, his voice softer. He slid an envelope across the desk. The return address was a correctional facility. Isla picked it up. It was from Preston. She opened it. It was short. Isla, I saw the news about the rebrand. It looks good. Dad's lawyers visited me. They tried to get me to sign an affidavit saying you stole the company. I told them to go to hell. You were right about everything. I'm sorry. P. Isla folded the letter and placed it in her drawer. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel anger. She just felt closure. Preston was serving his time, learning the hard way what it meant to be a man. Maybe, when he got out, he'd be worth knowing. Maybe not. But that wasn't her problem anymore. She stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled out before her, a grid of endless possibility. She had come here as a pawn, a trophy, a victim. She was leaving, or rather, staying, as the queen. But she wasn't a queen who ruled with fear, like Riley. She wasn't a king who ruled with arrogance, like Preston. She was an architect. She had taken a crumbling structure, stripped it down to the studs, and built something that could weather any storm. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. Text. Hey boss, the new HVAC system in the Brooklyn branch is acting up. Want to come take a look? Isla smiled. She grabbed her purse and her hard hat. Nathaniel, cancel my Tulao PM, Isla said, heading for the door. Where are you going? I have a very important meeting, Isla said, winking, with a boiler. She walked out of the office, the sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor, a rhythm of power, precision, and undeniable control. The projector screen had shown her fate once, but Isla Bennett had rewritten the script, and that is the story of how Isla Bennett turned a trap into a throne. It's a powerful reminder that in business and in love, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting the loudest. It's the one who pays attention to the details. Preston Sterling thought his money gave him power, but Isla proved that knowledge is the only currency that really matters. What did you think of Isla's final bluff against Riley? Would you have had the nerve to stand down a ghost with an empty gun? And do you think Preston deserved that small trust fund after everything he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and corporate takeovers, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep reading the fine print. Bye for now.